Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Temujin Kensu? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Frederick Thomas Freeman was born on May 23, 1963, and lived in the state of Michigan. He now goes by the name Temujin Kensu. In 1986, Temujin lived in the town of Rock on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. This is about a half hour north of Escanaba. By this time, Temujin was on the run from law enforcement and using an alias. He had a pending assault charge in Detroit and a pending perjury charge in Ann Arbor. In addition, he had been convicted for writing bad checks in the state of Washington. In May and June of 1986, Temujin had a romantic relationship with a woman named Crystal Merrill. After they stopped dating, Crystal became engaged to a man named Scott Macklem. His father was the mayor of Croswell, a small town 40 minutes north of Port Huron. Scott had graduated from high school in 1984, where he was voted the most popular and the best dressed. By 1986, when he was engaged to Crystal, Scott lived with his parents, worked at a men's clothing store, and attended St. Clair Community College, where he studied business. Scott planned on marrying Crystal in January 1987, but this marriage would never take place. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On November 5, 1986, at about 8:55 a.m., 20-year-old Scott Macklem was shot once in the chest with a 12-gauge shotgun in the parking lot of St. Clair Community College in Port Huron, Michigan. Scott did not survive. The police responded to the scene. Here's what they found during the course of their investigation. Scott's body was next to his vehicle. His car keys were in the driver's side door, and his gym bag was on the ground. It appeared as though he was shot from about 6 feet away. Several people were in the area when the murder occurred, but no one actually witnessed the shooting. Some witnesses saw a woman in the area. Other witnesses saw a man. A vehicle was seen by several witnesses driving away from the scene. Witnesses offered many different descriptions of this vehicle, including what color it was. There were reports that the car was tan or brown, reddish brown, black, blue, yellow, or gold. One student walked by Scott when he was next to his vehicle. He said, help me, I'm hurt." She continued walking toward her class. One male student named Renee, who would later become critical to the state's case, claimed that he saw a white male driving away in a tan car. He also mentioned the car may have been pink and tan. I don't believe this was a popular color combination in 1986 or in any year. Renee said that the white male was about 25 years old and wearing a green jacket. He wrote down the license plate of the vehicle, but it was not matched to any license plate the police had on record. The police spoke to Crystal Merrill. Again, she was the woman who had briefly dated Temujin and was engaged to the murder victim Scott. Crystal implied that Temujin Kensu must have been responsible for the murder. Later, the male witness, Renee, selected Temujin from a photo lineup. The police started looking for Temujin. He was understandably concerned that he had been identified as a suspect. Temujin called Crystal and asked her to explain why she implicated him. The police listened in on the conversation, which lasted for 2 hours, but Temujin never implicated himself in the murder. The police found Temujin on November 13 and arrested him. He claimed that during the time of the murder, he was in the town of Escanaba on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. This was 436 miles from Port Huron, where the murder occurred. Several witnesses confirmed his alibi. Despite this, the state believed that Temujin must have been guilty. He went to trial in the summer of 1987, which is pretty quick for a murder trial. His attorney had been convicted in 1985 for using cocaine in a park in Ohio and was allegedly using cocaine during the trial. This did not result in an optimal defense. Temujin Kensu was convicted of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on August 3, 1987. In 2010, his conviction was overturned on appeal, but in 2012, a higher court reversed that decision. At the time making this video, Temujin Kensu continues to serve his life sentence. Now moving to my analysis. Temujin Kensu maintains his innocence and has an extremely large number of supporters. They argue that there is no possible way he could have committed the murder. The state, of course, disagrees. They argue that Temujin had a fair trial and was found guilty. He is right where he needs to be. This brings me to the question, was Temujin Kensu guilty of murder? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that he was guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. Temujin Kensu was a convicted criminal and had 2 active arrest warrants before the murder. He was actually using an alias when he was arrested. Crystal, the woman he briefly dated, said that Temujin conducted an assault of a sexual nature against her on their first date, but she continued to see him anyway. She also made numerous other claims about Temujin. For example, he had ninja weapons. He claimed to be a high-ranking member of a secret organization that fought prostitution and drug rings. He was able to have people killed on command. Furthermore, he claimed that he had planted listening devices and could read her mind. Crystal claimed that Temujin loved her enough that he would kill another man for her. The witness in the college parking lot, Renee, selected Temujin from a photo lineup as the man who was driving the vehicle away from the murder scene. A jailhouse informant claimed that Temujin confessed to the murder. The state had a theory to explain how Temujin could have committed the murder despite having an alibi. Again, Temujin had witnesses who said that he was 436 miles from the crime scene when the murder took place. The state argued that Temujin must have chartered a private aircraft and left Escanaba after 1:30 a.m. when he was spotted by a witness, committed the murder in Port Huron, then flew back to Escanaba where he was spotted at noon. A pilot testified that private pilots frequently waited around the St. Clair County Airport for customers to show up. Moving to the exculpatory factors, no physical evidence connected Temujin to the crime, no fingerprints, no DNA, no blood, no gunshot residue. There's no evidence that he ever owned a shotgun, and the murder weapon was never found. Temujin had absolutely no motive to murder Scott. He was living with his girlfriend in a different part of the state and had not seen Crystal for months. There were several witnesses who placed Temujin in Escanaba, Michigan during the time of the murder. At a minimum, this is 6.5 hours away from Port Huron by motor vehicle. 2 witnesses said that he was having car trouble between midnight and 1:30 a.m. on the day of the shooting. His girlfriend, Michelle Woodworth, said that they were home in Rock on the morning of the murder until about 9 a.m. After this, they went to Escanaba. It's worth noting that Michelle was not called by the defense to testify, which left a gap in the alibi. 2 witnesses confirmed Temujin was in Escanaba by noon. 4 witnesses said he was there in the afternoon. Based on the alibi witnesses, there's no way that Temujin could have committed the murder. Even if one were to disregard the statement made by Michelle, because she did not testify, the time range is still challenging for the state. On November 5, 1986, the day of the murder, Temujin Kensu did not have an alibi for 10.5 hours, starting at 1:30 a.m. The murder occurred at about 8:55 a.m. Temujin could have driven to Port Huron and committed the murder, but he never could have made it back in time to be spotted at noon. In order to make that trip, he would have had to drive at about 145 miles per hour, mostly on 2-lane roads. There were no witnesses to the actual murder, only a few people who were nearby and heard the shotgun blast. A witness near the scene of the murder claimed he saw a suspicious man in the parking lot an hour before the shooting. He selected Temujin from a series of mugshots, only to pick a different man out of a lineup later. The primary prosecution witness, Renee, only saw the driver of the car for a few seconds. Just a few hours after the murder, Renee underwent hypnosis by a college professor who was a friend of one of the investigating officers. Before the hypnosis, Renee said that he saw a Mazda RX-7 sports car. After the hypnosis, he said it was a Ford Escort station wagon. At the time of the murder, Temujin drove a Mercury Marquis 4-door sedan, which was having mechanical problems. This full-size vehicle could not be confused with an RX-7 or Ford Escort. A few days later, Renee identified Temujin from a photo lineup but the police had essentially suggested a photo featuring Temujin. It was like they were trying to give Renee a hint on which photo to select. The jailhouse informant who testified against Temujin Kensu recanted in 1995. He fabricated the entire confession story. As far as the state's theory that Temujin chartered a private airplane, there are many reasons this is unlikely. For example, Temujin did not have a lot of money. He was selling vitamins door to door and could not pay his rent. How did he afford to charter an airplane? It would have cost somewhere between $500 and $1,500. There was no record of any flight. There was no flight plan. No pilot ever came forward, despite the murder case being all over the news. A man who ran the fuel and maintenance services for the St. Clair County Airport said that pilots did not hang around waiting for customers. He said that the airport would go for days without a single plane taking off. Furthermore, the pilot who testified at the murder trial was friends with the prosecutor. The murder victim, Scott, had irregular attendance at the community college and may have been using drugs. He had actually missed his 8 a.m. gym class on the day he was killed. Allegedly, Scott had been the target of threats by mysterious men. Perhaps he was murdered for some reason associated with substance use. When considering all the evidence in this case, do I think that Temujin Kensu was guilty of murder? No, I believe he was not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and not guilty in reality. Temujin is actually innocent. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Temujin was an impulsive, irresponsible, and high sensation-seeking individual who made a strong negative impression on people. One of these people was Crystal Merrill. Scott Macklem was murdered due to some type of drug-related dispute. His father was the mayor of a small town, which put a lot of pressure on the police to find a killer. Crystal had no idea who committed the murder, but she implicated Temujin because he was the only person that she knew who appeared to be capable of murder. People at the crime scene did not see anything helpful to the investigation, but the police were able to work with Renee enough to piece together an identification. After Temujin was arrested, the state encouraged a jailhouse informant to come forward. Despite all this maneuvering, the state did not have a good case, so they focused their attention at trial on destroying the defendant's reputation. Unfortunately, Temujin provided them a lot of ammunition through his bad behavior. He was practically a conspirator with the prosecution in this sense. The state was also able to weave his interest in martial arts, affinity for weapons, and statements allegedly made to Crystal into this bizarre super soldier narrative. They made Temujin out to be some type of expert ninja warrior who carried poison darts in his shoes. He supposedly had connections to Canadian ninjas. The state showed the jury various martial arts weapons which did not belong to Temujin. Rather, they were the same type of weapons he might have owned. On top of all the problems that Temujin had, his defense attorney was allegedly using cocaine during the trial. Considering cocaine as a stimulant, it sounds like his attorney was trying to give new meaning to the term speedy trial. Transcripts indicated that the attorney was incoherent and had trial notes that were filled with bizarre ramblings. He failed to call Michelle as a witness and failed to object to many of the prosecutor's questionable behaviors. Temujin Kensu has been forever labeled as a ninja killer, even though he was not a ninja and he was not accused of using ninja weapons in the murder. Now moving to my final thoughts. I think what happened in this case is that many different people in law enforcement felt as though Temujin Kensu deserved to be in prison whether he was guilty or not. To them, he was a bad guy. Society was safer with him locked up. Here's the problem with this attitude. In the criminal justice system, a person actually needs to be guilty of a crime before going to prison. Simply putting people in prison because they may have ended up there anyway cannot be justified. This case is a prime example of the irrational and negative bias law enforcement has against people with criminal records. At the very least, Temujin deserves a new trial. Preferably, he could be represented by an attorney who has a low level of interest in cocaine. Those are my thoughts in the case of Temujin Kensu. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.